My name is Arnie Johnson. I am Vicki Kinney's father. Vicki is the founder of the My Neighbor to Love Coalition in Brainerd. I've been asked to give some information about how I was able to take and build universal pensions to 525 employees and universal printing to 110 employees. But first, let me give you a little bit of my background. First, I graduated from high school. That's as far as I went. I have never been to college. In fact, not only that, but I said I was in the bottom half of my class. I barely squeaked through to graduate, so not a great beginning for me. After that, I was into the Army for 2 years. If you didn't go in the Army, you were going to get drafted in those days, so I went in to get that out of the way. I got married to my wife Joanne, still married for 65 years. I was a lumberjack. I made my living with a chainsaw, and I worked in the iron mines. I'm going to talk first a little bit about presenting yourself. By that I mean an interview. You're going for an interview to get a job. First of all, you have to be neat and dressed properly. I can't say enough about dress. Dress is so extremely important. I'm going to tell you a little story about dress. My wife and I were in Acapulco several years ago, and we were staying at the Princess Hotel, and we decided we were going to go early for dinner. So we went over. We were the first ones to get there. We walked into the place, and the maitre d' got us. First one, we go over, and we were dressed properly. We always dress nice when we go out. And so we went over, gave us probably the best table in the house. Shortly afterwards, a young couple came in. Now, I don't know, this guy, he probably could have bought and sold me many times over, I don't know. But they were wearing shorts and floppers and whatnot. And he took them and sat them over in a corner where they couldn't be seen. And so that's just an example. When you dress, people pay a lot of attention to that. I'm going to talk about meeting somebody. And I'm talking about going to an interview for a job. One of the first things you're going to do when you come in, you're going to introduce yourself to a person, and you're going to reach over and you're going to shake their hand. When you do that, give a firm handshake. Squeeze even a little tighter than you think you should. I have 6 grandsons. I had to have a class for all of them on how to shake hands and do it. And to this day, when you go to shake hands with them, you get a very strong handshake. When you do that, you shake their hand, you look them straight in the eye. Look them straight eye. That eye contact is so critically important. Speak clearly. Be enthusiastic and have a positive attitude about the interview for the job that you are trying to get. Be polite and respectful to your boss, and if you get the job, the coworkers. So if your time of the day, you start to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, you be there at 7:30. If you're supposed to be done at 4 o'clock, you don't leave till 4:30. You show them that you're willing to put in the extra time for that job. Extremely important. A word about enthusiasm. To be enthusiastic, you must act enthusiastic. When I first started out in sales part-time, I really didn't know much about what I was selling. But I received in the mail a little card, and on that card, it was a duck jumping up and down. It looked something like this right here. And it's a duck says, to be enthusiastic, you got to act enthusiastic. So when I went out on a sales call, I would be enthusiastic. I would rant and rave and jump up and down, whatever, to be enthusiastic as I possibly could be. I had many people tell me, say, Arnie, I'm really not sure what you're selling, but you're so enthusiastic about it, I'm going to buy. So I did. This duck, I have had all of my employees at Universal Pensions, once they went through the new employee orientation, they had one of these on their desk. There's an individual who I highly respected. He's passed away now, but he was probably one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all times. And that individual was Kurt Carlson. Kurt Carlson started out in Minneapolis with gold bond stamps. He invented the idea of having stamps. By buying groceries, you get so many stamps and you could turn them in for prizes and things. In fact, he would be promoting these, and his wife was dressed in a band uniform, beating on a bass drum to draw attention to people. That's how he started. But later in life, Kurt Carlson built the Radisson hotels all over the entire world. He in turn built Country Kitchens, all those restaurants all over, and many other things that he had done. But Kurt Carlson, the thing that he said that sticks with me about him, he said about obstacles. He says, obstacles are those frightening things when you take your eye off the target. When you take your eye off the target, don't look at anything else. Just keep moving to where you plan to go. I'm going to talk a little bit about dreams. I'm a dreamer. I've always been a dreamer. And in fact, after I graduated from high school and came back out of the service, and I run into one of my classmates and that I had, and he said, you know, Arnie, he says, when we were in high school, we always talked about you being a dreamer. You were looking out the window all the time rather than what you should be doing. So you were a dreamer, and you know, I took offense to that. That really bothered me. But later I thought about it, and I said, you know, dreams are good. I like dreams. Dreams are good. People should dream. Dream. Some people will dream about wanting to be an astronaut. They dream that they want to be a great golfer. They want to be somebody who can design clothing. Whatever these dreams, but the dreams might be beyond their reach, too far up, but they're dreaming about these things. Well, once you have a dream, every once in a while, and this dream will all of a sudden start to take form, and you can picture the dream. You can actually see this dream going through. When you can see it, and when you can taste it, and you can smell that dream, it is no longer a dream. It's a goal, and that's the goal which you should go for. When you enter into my office, you look on the wall, and straight ahead of you, you will see a big bronze plaque. And on that plaque is something, it's a saying, it came from a guy by the name of George Bernard Shaw, a playwright. He did a play in 1923. And early on in my career, I spotted in a magazine this little saying that was on there. And I said, boy, this makes sense. And it was, and his office says, some people say, why? I dream of things that never were. And I say, why not? And I said, that made so much sense. So as a result of that, I had a 8.5 by 11 picture frame made up with that saying on it. And I sat at my desk and I looked across the wall there, and I seen it every day. And I remember that summer because my daughters, Joan and Vicki, were home from college at ASU. And when they left, I noticed it was gone. It was missing. Well, Vicki's older sister, Joni, she managed to take that picture with her. She wanted it down there at ASU with her, so that disappeared. But some people look at things and say, why? I dream of things that never were. And I say, why not? I was working in the iron mines in Babbitt, right up there driving truck. And I was selling retirement plans for an insurance company part-time. And just wasn't just beginning. And I got this new manager. He came to me and he said, Arnie, why don't you quit the mines and go full-time? And I said, are you crazy? I said, I have a wife and 2 children. I'm barely making $400 a month. And then you want me to go out and do work. What if I don't make it? He said, well, let me ask you this question. He says, if you quit the mines and you went full-time and you did not make it, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? And I thought about that. And I said, I guess I would have to go back to the mines again and start over. He said, that's right. I said, okay. I tell you what, I have 2 weeks vacation coming up. And I said, if you're willing to go with me on the first week, you work with me and you teach me what you can and get me going on it. And the second week I'll be on my own. And if at the end of that time, end of that 2-week period of time, I can see that I can make a living, I said, I'll come back and quit the mines. At the end of that 2-week period of time, I had not sold a single thing. Nothing was sold. But that dream was true. I could visualize that, but I could do it. And I went and I quit my job. There's an individual who wrote a book. His name is Maxwell Maltz, with psycho-cybernetics. And in that book was one chapter in particular that I paid a lot of attention to, and I read it quite. And the chapter was how you take a crisis and you turn that crisis into a creative opportunity. Well, I'm going to give you two examples. One of the crises I had first starting out with the company was money. I did not have any money. I had 2 people on the payroll I had to pay. I had no money to do anything with, and so I had to figure some way to get money. Well, I came up with an idea. I had just got done signing up a new bank to do their record keeping for their IRAs in New York Mills. It was a Farmers and Merchant State Bank. And so I sat down in my office and I grabbed an 8.5 by 11 piece of white paper. I did a double fold on it like this, and then I wrote on the front of it, IRA Q&As. And then in the side of it, I drew lines. This is the brochure. So I go back over to him and I said, you know what you need? You need brochures. So people can understand what IRAs are about. So they will sign up and have an IRA with you. And he says, you know, that's a great idea, Arnie. When you go ahead and you get the pictures, you get these printed up, you bring them over and I'll buy some. And I said, well, I had 2 problems. First biggest problem I had to deal with is I didn't have any money to have them printed. So the first thing, number one, I convinced him at that time to place a large order with me. And he did. Now, I had to convince him to pay me in advance for the brochures so I could go have them printed. So I did. We came back and got in our office, and staff went ahead and we designed this really nice brochure. Took it to the printer and they went ahead and they said, well, I'll have it for you shortly. I said, sooner the better. And I got the brochure and they called me. And he says, we have the brochures, they're ready. I said, well, great. And he says, but there's a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, you better come over here. So I went over there and they had the brochures and he said, there they are. And I looked at them and I said, gee, that looks pretty good. And he says, yeah, but open it up. And I opened it up and it was upside down. Oh my God, what am I gonna do? I was devastated. And he looked at it, he said, well, Arnie, we're gonna print new ones for you right away. And I don't know how many thousand of these things I had in boxes. So he said, you can take them out. So I took them out of there. I jumped in my car. I headed for New York Mills. Went over there and I said, I got your brochures. And he said, oh, here. And I opened it to him. He looked, he said, yeah, but it's upside down in here. And I said, well, of course it's upside. It's supposed to be upside down. Don't you know it's a proven fact that anybody who picks up a brochure, they don't pay much attention to it. But if they have to take physical action to turn it over, they'll read the entire thing. I sold him, and I sold every one of those upside-down brochures. I got the money I needed to get through that crisis that I had to deal with. Another crisis I had is, what happened, my staff, they would come in sometimes to me in the office, and they'd say, Arnie, we have a crisis, we have a problem. And I said, okay, tell me about it, what is it? They'd go ahead and they would explain to me what the problem crisis was. And I said, okay, we have that crisis. I says, now you tell me how we're going to make some money because of this crisis. I had to turn their thinking around. They went, oh, no. About that same time, there was a senator out in Idaho. His name was Bob Paquin. And he was trying to do away with IRAs. He wanted to get rid of them. Well, we didn't want that. And thank goodness he failed. But I said, you know, I said, Christ, we have to do something. We have to become better known. We've got to do something. I said, why don't we start conducting seminars around the country? We'll go out and we'll teach the employees of the banks, insurance companies, mutual fund companies, whatever they may be, teach them about IRAs and keep them up to date. And so we started doing that. In fact, I used to go out and do it myself. Many times I would leave on a Sunday evening on a plane, flying to someplace. Being there, by the time I'd come back Friday night, well, I will have probably been at least 4 or 5 different cities conducting these seminars. And at the end, when I finally sold the company, at that time, we were teaching about 10,000 people per year. Not only that, but many of these organizations, because of this, signed up for us to do their record keep reporting. I tell you about other people that had different sayings that have meant an awful lot to me. Well, I have one of my own. I didn't realize it. But several years ago, I was designated as the Small Business Person of the Year for the state of Minnesota. A great honor, something I was very, very proud of. It was great. The local radio station wanted to interview me. And so they asked me to come over, so I went over and I did the interview. Left there, came back, and I walked in the front door of our office, and there stands one of my officers, Gene Patch, and he says, Arnie, this is you. I said, what's me? He said, what you said. I said, what did I say? And he said, you said, I don't let obstacles get in my way. I either go over them, I go around them, or I go through them, but I never stop. That's my saying, and I own that. That is, I don't let obstacles get in my way. I either go over them, around them, or through them, and keep on going. And so should you. You should never, ever stop. At the present time, I'm 87 years of age, but I still come into my office at least twice a week. And I would say to you, pay attention to your dreams, study them, and every once in a while take one of those dreams and turn it into a goal. Thank you.